Well, good afternoon. My name is Cammie Abernathy. I'm Dean of the Herbert Wertheim College of Engineering, and it's my great privilege and pleasure this afternoon to introduce our Linda Hudson Leader in Residence for Fall 2018, Mr. David M. Thomas. Mr. Thomas is not only a tremendous business leader, he's also a Gator, and we're very grateful to him for his willingness to come back and speak with us today. Let me tell you a little bit about Dave's background. Dave currently serves as chairman of Fortune Brands Home and Security Board of Directors, a Fortune 300 company with brands such as Moen, Master Brand Cabinets, and Master Lock. He is also a presiding director of the Board of Directors of Interpublic Group, one of the largest holding companies of advertising agencies and communication services. In addition, he is a vice chairman of the Fidelity Investments Board of Trustees. Fidelity, as you probably know, is a global leader in mutual funds and financial services. He served in the past as chairman and CEO of IMS Health, the global leader in information and consulting solutions for the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries from the end of 2000 until March 2006. And prior to that, he had a long, distinguished career with IBM, serving as senior vice president and group executive. He was a member of IBM's corporate executive committee, which oversees all worldwide business operations. While at IBM, his assignments ranged from general manager of the mid-range systems manufacturing and development business to president of IBM's distribution channel sales to general manager of IBM Asia Pacific and general manager of IBM North America. He is, as I mentioned, a Gator. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees in industrial engineering from the University of Florida and received the University of Florida's Distinguished Alumnus Award in 1996. You may also have recognized his name. He served on the Board of Trustees at the University of Florida from 2013 to 2018. It is a real pleasure to have him here today. I think you'll find that Dave is one of the most experienced and eloquent examples of technology leadership that you could possibly hope to find. I've learned so much from listening to him for the last few days and over the last few years that I've gotten an opportunity to work with him. So with no further ado, please welcome Mr. Dave Thomas.
Thank you, Cammie, very much. As they say, as you get older, they talk about you as you being better than you were. So it's nice to be here. But just 1 second here. I want to take a second, if I could. Let me do this. There we go. Oh, that's beautiful. No, that's the way I show that I'm connected to your generation. That's all. But you are considered the selfie generation. That's a word, I guess, coined in 2002 when both of you were probably about born. Word of the year in 2013, so it's a very important word, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I also know about this generation that you have the attention spans. I've read somewhere that the attention span of this generation is slightly shorter than a goldfish. So we'll try to break it into small pieces so you can stay with me while we're here. But as Cammie mentioned, I'll share with you just a little bit on my background, although she did it very eloquently, but it kind of tells you how I've shaped some of the opinions you'll hear me talk about as I go forward, so you'll kind of have a sense for that. But I left University of Florida, went to work with IBM in Tampa to make 8 years short. It was 8 moves, about 19 or 20 different roles and responsibilities. It was great fun, great challenges. A lot of big businesses, and I left there in 2002. It was a very fair way to exit. I got called in by my boss, Lou Gershner, who had had 6 jobs working for, and he said that he was about to name a president that would be his successor, and it wasn't going to be me. So he said, like for you to stay here, but you really train yourself to be a CEO, and so you might want to think about doing that. So that's what I did. IMS, you won't be familiar with them, but IMS is a company that provides information services to pharmaceutical companies. It was about $1.2 billion company, so I just run a business that was $53 billion down to $1 billion, but it was a global business, so it had a lot of the same issues. And we had a lot of fun there, applying a lot of things I learned at IBM and running global businesses to grow to about 5 years later. We were about $2.5 billion. If you tried to find it today, you'll find out that they merged with another company, and it's called IQVIA now, which is about the least friendly name that I can think of. But it's about a $10 billion business today. So that's kind of my work career. As Cammie mentioned, I am currently on those 3 boards.
I've also been on the board of 3 small companies with very small revenues in the range of 3 million up to 20 million. So I've had a little bit of experience with those. So I've seen the challenges of growth and innovation in a number of different industries and a number of different companies of different sizes. So that's why I've got some of my own ideas about what the challenges are of innovation and growth in large companies that we'll talk about today. So that's kind of my background. So you really ask, why is it so hard for companies to grow, and why is it hard for companies to innovate? And is it true that large companies struggle with that a lot more than small companies struggle with that? And first of all, let me give you my answer on large versus small. I think the challenges are the same, but they're for different reasons. But, if a small company struggles with innovation and growth, it just goes away, so you don't hear about it. If a large company struggles with innovation and growth, that ends up being one of your case studies you study. I know you've had a case study on IBM, so that's been a good one to talk about in that regard. So the challenges, though, are much the same, but they have different assets in those companies, and so the challenges they face in innovating and growing are just a little bit different. But let's define innovation. What is innovation? Well, innovation to me is the process of translating an idea or an invention into a product or a service that has enough value that a customer will pay you money for it, and then it provides return to a shareholder. That's all it is. It can be a brand new idea, or it can be a new shape of an old idea, but whatever it is that's new enough that customers will pay you money for is what is an innovation. Those of you in engineering, how many of you are in engineering in here? Just about everybody, yeah. The good news is you're going to find a job. Let me tell you that for one thing. But, in engineering, we're kind of taught that when you have a problem like this and you're saying, how do we grow? What you do is you analyze the problem, you get all the data you need, you apply some formulas or some process to it, and out the end comes an answer. And it's not quite that easy when you're trying to grow a company. The answers don't come out quite that clear. But it is hard to sustain growth. You don't need to look very far in the Fortune top 10 companies to know how hard it is. If you looked at the Fortune top 10 companies in revenue in 2006, like when I retired, only of those 10 companies, only 2 are still on that list. If you look at market valuation changes in that 10-year period, the change is even more stark. And half of the S&P 500 companies that are around here today won't be here in 10 years. That's pretty stark. That tells you, now a lot of that's mergers and acquisitions, but the challenges of growing a company are really very difficult, particularly large companies. So what do you think the problem is? You've done a lot of case study work. What would you think some of the problems of, what keeps companies from growing? Yes?
Short-term decisions, because CEOs are growing fast.
Short-term decisions is one. Short-term, focusing on the short-term, not long-term. Or any other ideas? Come on, you're better than this. Yes, I'm tired of talking. I've been talking for 2 days, so I can't talk that much.
A resistance to change, staying, how things were established.
So resistance to change, maybe culture of the company. Matthew?
Who are you pointing
to? You.
Okay. So I've heard that large companies, they have a brand to protect. So if a small company comes out with a product or service or whatever and it doesn't work, no one cares. It just fails. But if a big company comes out with a product and it turns out to be this big flop, then it's really embarrassing for the company.
Cost them a lot more, doesn't it? Well, there are other things that could cause it. Some people think it's investment, and it's a little bit the short-term thing. Do companies invest enough in the long term versus short term? Certainly culture, we'll talk about that a little bit. A lot of times people think it's the company doesn't have a strategy for growth. I will tell you, I've never met a company without a good strategy. You can write down a strategy on a piece of paper, and you can rationalize, you can think about it. They all feel like good strategies. So strategy really normally isn't the problem. Talk about that. Sometimes it's just execution. Some people feel like companies don't grow because they've gotten into commodity markets. So it's a little bit the markets you serve. Well, I would say the things I think that are not a problem in that list we just kind of talked about was first the investment, because big companies particularly invest a lot in innovation. If you look at the pharmaceutical industry, J&J, Pfizer, Novartis, they all invest $8 to $9 billion a year in R&D. It's a lot of money. IBM invests a lot. By the way, IBM has garnered the most U.S. patents of any company in the U.S. for the last 25 consecutive years. Does anybody think of IBM being the most innovative company in the... They had 9,000 patents last year, 4,000 of them in AI. We'll see what comes out of it. So it's really not investment. Companies invest a lot. The question is, what do you do with that investment? How do you turn it into a market offering, and how do you make a difference in your business? The other thing I would say is not a problem is market serve. You can think of a lot of commodity businesses and you see a lot of innovation. One of the most commodity things you can do is hamburgers, right? Well, look at Shake Shack. Shake Shack all of a sudden took a commodity business and look at how they've grown by just having a differentiated product. If you look within even a McDonald's, I mean, who isn't starving for a new double Mac, you know? So they innovate with new offerings. Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Here are two companies that sell nothing but colored water, basically. How do they grow? Well, new brands. Coke adds a brand every month, somewhere in the world. And guess what they discovered? They both discovered water. Isn't that great? A lot of their growth has come from water, if you can believe that or not. That's so I don't know if that's all that innovative, but it certainly made a difference in their business. So I don't think it's investment. It's getting return on that investment. I don't think it's market served. One of the things I do think that affects it, though, is a little bit about what you mentioned, and that's the realities of your financial strategy. And the first reality you have is the law of large numbers. And to give you an example of that, in the mid-90s, when I was at IBM, we were an $80 billion company. The IT industry was growing about 10%. So the expectation of IBM was to grow 10%, $8 billion. You want to add an $8 billion company every year to just keep up with industry growth. Cisco was kind of the darling of Wall Street at that point in time. They were an $8 billion company. So really what the expectation was is how can you grow Cisco every year in IBM? That's the challenge of large numbers. You got to have big ideas. So even though you may have a lot of inventions, you may have a lot of things and ideas and patents, it's figuring out which one of those is going to be big enough to make the difference in a company of that size. So what do companies do? They normally invest in their core business because those investments are, one, they're more predictable. They know what their customers want added to the current product line they have, and they also have the best financial returns, not only short term, but in most cases over at least the medium, if not long term. So that financial strategy and the law of large numbers plays quite a bit. Then you have what I call the tyranny of quarterly earnings. I don't think you'll ever find any company who thinks it's a good idea to report your earnings on a quarterly basis. It's just required by the market. And by the way, if you're a CEO and you'd like to keep your job, what happens to your stock matters a lot. That's the only way you keep your job, right? They force you to make a lot of trade-offs in long-term versus short-term because you can't just decide to manage for one of those two. You have to balance with the long-term and the short-term. Some examples of that, you take Kodak. Kodak actually invented the digital camera. But their 70% market share of the film market said, short-term, I'm going to invest in film. Didn't work out so well for them. You know, they stuck to it way too long, lost the digital market, and bankrupt in 2012. So it is a little bit, as someone mentioned, it's what your business was and how quickly can you change from that business. You know, it's my own story about quarterly earnings is my second quarter, I joined IMS in November, so the fourth quarter was kind of done, so you just report in January. So my first real quarter where I was going to be held accountable, and you are held accountable day one, was going to be the second quarter. Well, IMS had gotten into a habit of selling off pieces of its business. And when they sold it off, they sold data assets with it, which helped revenue and profits in that quarter. So I get to the second quarter, I'm just getting there. I'm just going out calling on customers to find out what they like or don't like about us. And I think our earnings that quarter was projected to be, let's say, 20 cents. Well, we had this one transaction where they were trying to sell off a business that had to do with the over-the-counter market. And I look at the business and they tell me about it, and it sounded like, this could be a really nice growth business. But we had committed in our forecasted earnings for that quarter, the prior CEO, that 20 cents and 10 cents of that was going to come from selling this business. So you get down to the last week and you're negotiating selling this business, and I'm sitting there saying, why are we selling this business? And so I had to make a decision whether or not, for the short term, and making my first quarterly outlook on profit, we were going to go through and sell this business, or did I think this business had enough growth potential? They say, we're going to miss by half. That's a big miss in the market. So you have to make those decisions. We made a decision not to sell the business. It's turned out to be a really good growth business for IMS for 2 or 3 years. But those are the kind of decisions that you have to make. Now, that one kind of got forced on us because somebody had made a decision before, but it's the kind of trade-offs you make. And your key responsibility as a CEO or as a board is that capital deployment. How much money do you spend on dividends to give money back to shareholders? That's what they expect. Or share buybacks, which is another thing that increases the value of the holdings of a shareholder. Or how much do you invest in the business, in new businesses? And that's the challenge, that trade-off of long and short term is really a balance that every company has to go through to figure out how it's going to grow. So it's not an easy thing to say, I'm just going to invest for the long term, because then you don't last for the long term. And yet you know your job as a board and as a CEO is, how do we make this business grow over the long term? Then you have all the outside people telling you how to run the business. You have the big fund companies, you have the activists who come in and tell you, do everything for the short term, lever up, make profits look better in the short term, and then they're out of stock because they don't care if it lasts, they just want it to last a quarter, right? So that is a big challenge for big companies in terms of that. Second thing I think that causes companies to struggle with growth is also mentioned is culture. What is I think it was Peter Drucker that said that culture eats strategy for lunch. Or maybe he said breakfast, I can't remember. Anyway, culture wins. And, it's true that culture, which is the set of habits, behaviors, morals, traditions, rituals that define how a company acts and how it works, become very strong in companies. I worked for a company that had one of the strongest cultures, and that was IBM. We had 3 fundamental beliefs that every person at IBM could recite to you. It was respect for the individual, it was best customer service, and excellence in everything we do. We talked about that all the time. It was in every executive speech. Somehow it was worked into everything. And the culture was, in being the best at customer service and being in their primary mainframe or central processing business, we made everything to be the best. We wanted the highest quality. We wanted the most scalability. We wanted it to be the most secure. We just had that mainframe mindset. So along comes the PC. Different thing. It's where the market's kind of going. We had this challenge with little distributed systems, but we kind of won that battle. Digital equipment came and went. Wang came and went. But along comes the PC. So all of a sudden, here's a business. You use industry standard parts. You use somebody else's software. And you sell through a third party, so you're not even talking to the customer. Well, you can see how that clashed with the culture within IBM. So we knew we had to do something entirely different. So what we did is we made it a completely separate division. We moved it to Florida, moved it to Boca Raton at the time. Should still be there. It's not. That's another story. But that was the only way we were going to be successful at the PC business. And we were very successful pretty much as a fast follower in the business, although we had invented a lot of what started the PC business. Actually, Xerox. Here's another example of Xerox. Xerox invented the Ethernet. They invented the graphical interface that Apple copied. They invented bit mapping. All the things that were very critical to the growth of the PC business, Xerox invented. But yet, here they were a copier company and they didn't do anything with it. And that's because they were a copier company, I think. But anyway, so we did well at PC business for a long time. We actually ended up growing it to about an $18 billion business, so that's pretty successful. But then we said, our culture says we could build a better PC. So these desktop systems that are going out there, they're not as reliable, they're not scalable. The operating system, you got to reboot it 3 times a day. It doesn't have the security features built into it. It's not nearly as robust. And so we decided to start building a better PC. And we decided if we could build it this much better, customers would pay us this much more for it, we'd have a good business. Unfortunately, the customer voted good is good enough, right, in the PC business. So all of a sudden, we're investing a lot more in it, making a more robust product. We even developed our own operating system, OS2. None of you have heard of OS2, I'm sure. We spent billions of dollars on it. It was a better operating system than Microsoft by a lot in terms of scalability, security. But it was this big, so you had to buy a lot of storage, and it cost too much. So, but you can see how culture, even though we were successful early on, culture inhibited our growth because it wasn't really who we were. It wasn't in the DNA of IBM to have a Me Too kind of product. So when customers face that idea of, we've got the balance of short term and long term, we've got to have something big enough to make a difference. We know culturally there's some things we're just not going to be good at. So what do companies think of as the next, what did they do next? They merge, they buy something, right? They look to buy something that kind of fits the strategy. They say, this is a big boost. This gives us greater, position in the marketplace, etc. And I don't know how many of them you look at. I look at a lot of them. Most of them don't do all that well. And a lot of it has to do with that culture thing. You have some like, you remember AOL and Time Warner. If you ever knew anybody that worked at either one of those companies, they were totally different cultures. The strategy looked great, but it never worked. Cost shareholders billions of dollars. Chrysler and Daimler-Benz. Here are 2 car companies that merged, because one's really strong in this market, one's really good in this market. They got different product line. It looked like it was a great merger. The cultures just could never work. Again, cost shareholders billions of dollars. So those are bad fits. Then you get some that are just bad ideas in my mind. About the time we were trying to sell the PC business, HP decided to buy Compaq. So they doubled down on the PC business right when it was everything in terms of margins were deteriorating in the PC business. So to me, that's just a bad idea. Sears and Kmart. All I know is if you got a really bad trouble business and you got another big bad and trouble business and you put them together, you got a big bad and trouble business. I don't care how much real estate you have. That's just double trouble. So that's a bad idea. There are some good ones. ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil is one of those 2 companies that's still on the top 10 Fortune list from 10 years ago. Why? They were in a business that they all understood. The cultures fit. Disney and Pixar. Very different skill sets. Pixar had technologies that Disney could really help them get to market and get scaled in a big hurry. So, but you can see that the next step in terms of innovating, when you need a big idea, it's hard to create a big idea bottoms up. So that's why you see all these mergers and acquisitions. That's when you get into the issue of how is it really going to fit? Does it fit who we are? Can we make these cultures work together? I called on the pharmaceutical industry for years. Pfizer merged with Warner Lambert years before I got into business. But I think it was 10 years later And you could go into Pfizer and talk to somebody, and they'd say he was a Warren Lambert guy. She worked at Warren Lambert. They worked in the same building. They'd been there for 5 or 6 years. They still thought of themselves as being different. So I think that's a key challenge. So just to make sure I keep you for your attention span level, which I know I've exceeded, the thing that comes into it after that is, well, what is leadership doing to affect those things? What are the leadership traits that either encourage and fuel innovation and growth, or what are the attributes of a leader who kind of stifles growth? And I think you can see it in terms of how they make the long and short-term trade-offs, but it really is how leadership acts. It's how leadership, where they spend their time. Do they spend enough time thinking about that new idea? Do they put their dollars where they're thinking? Because the biggest challenge a lot of times is companies will invest this much money, but that's not going to be enough to get it going. But they're reluctant to really put enough wood behind the arrow, if you would, to really make a business grow. So who do they put in charge of that business? How much resource do they put behind that business? Where do they spend their time? And how do they compensate the people in it? That's some of the things you can watch in leadership behavior. Leadership. I was struck by this article. Let me read you this. This is talking about wanting to engender culture and remake a business. These are some quotes from a leader. And listen to this. He says, "My goal is to see our company become a great company, whose greatness is sustainable for generations to come. The most important aspect of beginning to create a new and winning culture is ensuring we have the right people in place. We've worked hard attempting to identify the right people. We now have an executive team that we believe has the capabilities and commitment to enable us to become a great company. Our focus is on understanding our customers, figuring out how to provide them products and services they value so that we can build relationships with them profitably and serve them over the long term. And perhaps the most critical investment decision is the decision to invest in the people to make up our company. We need to continue to attract associates and executives who are talented, hardworking, honest, ethical, commercial, and dedicated." Pretty good, huh? I don't know how the company did. 12 years later, their sales were down 66%. They lost $7 billion in stock value. It was down 99.6%, and they went bankrupt this year. It was Sears. It was Eddie. It was the Sears, Eddie Lambert at Sears. Speech is right, but when you study the case, what happened is, and why he was not enabled to engender growth, is his behaviors weren't there. He stayed in Florida. He lived in Florida. He went to the headquarters at Sears once a year for the annual meeting. He did everything else by video conference. So you can imagine his senior executive team in Chicago sees him only through. They used to talk about going upstairs to listen to Oz, right? He didn't go to stores. He didn't talk to the people that worked in the stores. He didn't watch customers walk around the store. So the behavior, great speech, the behaviors didn't fit. Now, I think he's been a terrific investor, but obviously he wasn't a terrific person in terms of operating and running a company. Second, I would contrast that with Lou Gerstner coming into IBM. IBM had just gone through a very difficult time. First time we'd hired an outside CEO. Lou Gerstner came in and said, I've been a customer, because he was at American Express before. He says, I've been a customer of IBM, and IBM, you've lost touch with your customer. So what was his behavior? Well, we started having these customer conferences in several different countries, 2 days, filled the room with CIOs from all our large customers. Lou sat in the room for 2 solid days, and getting a CEO to sit in the room for 2 solid days is a lot. We reinstituted the program we had where all of us that were direct reports to him, we had 3 or 4 customers we were partnership executive on. We weren't paid on what happened there, but I was supposed to know everything that happened with Merrill Lynch and IBM and UPS and IBM. And, So we all had that. So it was really getting back in touch with the customer, picking the right people for right jobs. He made very quick decisions on his team, but he spent the time. He learned every business. He had us all write down. He had all the business leaders. He asked us to write down on 2 pages, tell them about our business. What's the business are you in? What are the key issues in the business? What are the 2 critical factors going forward? Write it on 2 pages. Many of us were totally incapable. I felt like I was pretty net, so I got mine down to 2 pages. I think our software group had several hundred pages, which shows you that all those things were important, but it wasn't the 2 things that mattered the most. So that focus and him spending that time going through every business is what helped IBM turn around. That and our long-standing customer relationships, I think. But those are the 2 things that I think leadership can do. You can make all the speeches you want about innovation and growth, but if you don't put the resources behind it, if you don't reward the people that are doing it, if you don't incent it the right way, and then if you don't act, if your behaviors don't look like you're supporting it, it won't work. And so that's how the culture didn't need to change at IBM about the customer, but we really needed to re-energize it, and I think that's what we were able to do. And there's some reasons why that happened, but I know I'm well past your attention span at this point in time, and I want to get to your questions. So, okay, any questions from all that? Yes, sir.
I have a question about culture. So, in the Engineering Institute classes we have here at UF, they stress the importance of culture a lot in companies, and it seems like it's hard enough when you have either one office or even offices in the nation. Well, that's harder.
Yep.
How do you try to have a cohesive culture when you're an international business and you have the culture of the nation you're in is different?
Well, it's a much more difficult problem. So normally, if you got any company of that size has already got some culture. So the question is, what do you think needs to change about it, if anything, or how do you support it? And so I think a lot of it has to do with you got to show up, you got to talk to customers in each of those places, you got to show to the team that you're engaged with that customer. Then you've got to communicate well what the company is about. If you read, and I don't mean to make Lou Gerstner the greatest CEO ever, although he was right for us at the right time, but if you read his book about IBM and Elephants Can Dance or something, I think there's a little revisionist history in the first part about what he accomplished, but the magic was in, if you at the back in the appendix, is the letters he wrote to employees. So you're trying to communicate to 300,000 people at that time, round numbers. And that communication was so clear that everybody could look at it and say, I think I know how this affects and then it'd be 3/4 of a page. And so it just tells you the importance of communications now. And then, does he pick people who share those values and kind of communicate the same thing? That's how it really starts. But it's a hard thing to change. Habits are hard things to change. How many of you make New Year's resolutions? Yeah, everybody keep all theirs. Gyms are really busy in January, aren't they? They say New Year's resolutions started about 153 BC. Now, how would they know that? Anybody got any idea? But anyway, think about it. People write down things that they want to change about themselves. They know what they are. They want to change them. They write them down or make a list, and yet they can't change the habits. It lasts for 30 days. You go to classes, you go to lectures, you hear things, you learn something. How long does it last? Sometimes it lasts, sometimes it doesn't. But this changing habits is a very difficult thing to do, I think, in cultures. Other questions? Yes, sir.
How can you evaluate a company's culture when looking from the outside, when you're not working?
You can read a lot about it. Some of it's going to be true, some of it's not true. I think you only know by showing up. I mean, you really can't know. You try to find people that work there. You talk to them. If you get a chance to talk to the executives, you do it. But you can get a feel though. You're doing a lot of interviews now. A lot of you are doing interviews several times a day. How'd it go this morning, by the way? Good.
Right after this.
Okay. Still getting prepared. But you can turn a lot just by the questions they ask, how they act. But once you get there, you'll really find out. So you're not going to know it completely going in. But companies have reputations about how they treat employees. I read the other day, Starbucks spends more money on health insurance than it does on coffee. That's how they keep people working at Starbucks, is benefits. I mean, particularly those that are kind of in between jobs or finishing college. So, well, you know, what should you take away from this discussion? I think first of all, people run these companies are not dumb. They got a lot of people, smart people around them. They get a lot of help from outside consultants to help them. It's not that they don't think about things. It's not that they don't put good strategies on paper. It's a matter of how can they put together the human resources, the human people, the human team to actually go make it happen. Corporations like you develop habits. They demonstrate the behaviors that define who they are by how they act. Sometimes they're good at it, sometimes they're not. But they view their world, many of them view their world through their own selfies, what they think they are. And as a company, you are what your customers think you are, not what you think you are. And so that's why, at least the lesson I learned going and transitioning from IBM was go see the customer first. And you'll have a customer, whether it be an internal or an external customer, wherever you work, you're going to have a customer. It may not be, like I say, external, but it's going to be a customer, and you're going to have to convince them to take action. So you're going to be a salesman, and you're going to have customers, whether you like it or not, in any business, I think. But convincing them to take, everyone in a company to take action is a big job. And the same is true as you as future leaders of these businesses. You know, you don't decide you're a leader. Other people decide you're a leader. And how do they decide it? They decide it on your behaviors. How you act. Are you on time? Is your appearance appropriate? Are you bringing energy to the job? Are you optimistic? Are you a person that they want to work with? Just think about the most enthusiastic person you know. Think about who's the most enthusiastic person. What happens when they come into the room? It's just a little. It lights up the room. It's a little bit of energy. I got a little grandson that lights up any room he walks into. You're a little afraid what he's going to do, but he lights up the room. But you know that's what companies are expecting from you. You are the energy companies are looking for. You are going to be a catalyst for change, and it all depends on your personal culture. What is your personal culture? What habits do you have that you need to change? I'm not picking on you for that.
Framing the leader like this extroverted person, it doesn't make like the introverted person not a good leader. If someone just comes and it's not that quiet, there's more like thinking. So framing the extroverted has like the big leader. Isn't that like it can lead to mistakes?
It can lead to mistakes. I think if you look at people that are getting CEO jobs today, back in the 80s, 90s, it was all about this Superman, Superwoman CEO. Very visible externally, very extroverted. You look at people that get in the CEO jobs today, I think they're more the introverted types. They're people that have grown up in the business that really understand the people, understand the culture of the business. That's where most of those jobs are going to today, I think. Not all of them, but normally you only hire a CEO externally is if your business is in big trouble. Because your job as a board member is to make sure you've got somebody within the company you're developing to take over that role. That's your number one job as a board. But I don't think it's necessarily... I think some of our greatest leaders demonstrate a lot more humility. And I use the quote, C.S. Lewis has a quote about, he says, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And when you see, you can tell when CEOs stay too long in a job, or coaches stay too long. It becomes about them. The company starts to anticipate how they're going to react, what they're going to react to. But it takes a lot of humility. I tell you, it's very humility. You get a lot of humility when you get one of these jobs as CEO, because you don't know everything. You know you're going to depend on a lot of people. You know a lot of people are depending on you. So your listening skills have to get a lot better, and you have to surround yourself. You want people working for you who are better than you are. Because your job as a leader is to create leaders, not to create followers. That's what your job is at a CEO level. So think about your own habits. Are you really how do people think about you? What do they say about you when you're not in the room? What do they say when you get assigned to their team on a project? Are they happy or are they not so sure? It's not your selfie either. It's what other people think your picture looks like is what matters, because and so deciding what habits you think you need to change about yourself and how you go about that's the way you're going to grow, because you've got to get better every day. The market's going to require it, your competition's going to require it. But so I think it is about personal culture, it's about company culture, but to be leaders, you've got to demonstrate those cultures. Where we had a session yesterday about leading without authority. All these teams you put together to one of these projects, somebody evolves as kind of a leader. Why? What do they do? And so think about your own habits. Think about your own leadership style. I asked a question earlier this morning. I didn't get a big response, but how many of you are Ernest Tubb fans? Thank you for being here, Cammie. Now, Ernest Tubb, you would know. Ernest Tubb was a country singer in the 40s and the 50s. I mean, this is going back. This is before me. But they had, and by the way, if you listen to him, you wouldn't like his music now either. But they asked Ernest Tubb, said, what makes a great songwriter? He says two simple things. It's clarity of thought and individual style. That's what makes great leaders. Clarity of thought and developing your own style for how you communicate it, what behaviors you demonstrate to the peers around you. So I appreciate you very much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the cookies at least. I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have. Yes, sir.
Of course, we're all still students. So what do you think about the kind of fake it till you make it kind of attitude as we're trying to develop these habits?
I don't really know how to answer that. I'll tell you. Let me go at it this way. Let me tell you what I think derails people from achieving what they want to do. First of all, putting yourself first. We kind of talked about that. You get, once you forget about yourself, you start to become a leader. Second thing is not accepting okay work. The one behavior you can have when you take any job is not to accept okay work. Look, I've been to college, I've been to classes. I knew some classes I could get by on and not have to, I can get a B without doing this much work. But doing okay work is not okay. You want to do exceptional work. You've got to set a standard for yourself and for the people who are working around you that okay work is not okay. In business, a lot of times you get people that explain to you why something didn't happen. Well, explain to me why something didn't happen is not good enough.
Make it happen.
We may have to do something different. It may not be right now, but it's not over till we win, right? That's the competitive side of it. But I think those few things of what it starts with if you don't have the ethics and the trust of people, nothing's. So I'm assuming those. If you don't have those, you're not going to. But then, for not putting yourself first, not accepting okay work, raising your own standards, making yourself better every day. It's like exercise. You got to do it every day, whether you want to or not. So you don't get better, you get worse, right? And the worst thing you have in a business is people get complacent in what they do. They don't have to be
a leader, they can be a subject matter expert. You need a lot of those subject matter experts that do their job the best of anybody in the world. They don't want to manage people. They want to create things or projects. You need a lot of those people. But you also need people that can lead other people. No question. That's what you get for touching your hair. Yes, sir.
How did you translate your skills from IBM to smaller companies to Fidelity?
Well, Fidelity's, the boards are different. You get to be on boards because of your track record in business. Because normally they go through a recruiter that says, here's our board of directors. We want a diverse set of skills. We want a diverse set of people on that board normally. And so that kind of goes through a search process, and, you know, by what you've done in business, you get known and you get a chance to interview for those. That's a little bit of serendipity. They want something, you know, they want the technical background you have, they want your understanding of technology, or just the fact you've run a business. And that's a little different. The transition from IBM to IMS was really very easy. I mean, it was all about getting the right people in the right jobs, making sure you understood what customers wanted, and figuring out what it is that you can add to the offerings you have to make it grow. I mean, it was, I think because of the variation of experience I had in IBM, that really wasn't hard. Becoming a board member is a little harder because you got to decide, you're not in management, so you kind of got to step back and say, okay, it's management's job to figure out the strategy. My job is to kind of ask a lot of questions about it, test it, make sure it makes sense, you know, get other opinions on it. But it's up to management to come up with a job. So you're not doing that anymore. So you change roles a little bit. The Fidelity role is you're a board of trustees. That's a little bit different. In the board of directors, you're there you pick the CEO, you kind of do the succession planning for all the key jobs along with management. You approve the strategy, you do all those kind of things. You're kind of a partner with management. The Fidelity Board of Trustees is financial services, and you're there to represent the shareholders. So you're making sure Fidelity doesn't cost too much, does the right job of customer service. So I'm not involved in the business strategy. We didn't pick the CEO. It's a private company. She happened to be the daughter of the founder. She's, it's a pretty good odds she was going to get the job. Plus, she's done every job in the business. So, so it's a little different. Every job, those are all a little bit different. It's a little more. I wouldn't say it's adversarial, but it is a little more adversarial. Yes, sir, Christian.
What are the things that you can do to contribute to a group culture when you're not necessarily in a leadership position?
Well, you can't lead a team if you can't be on a team. So you take on your responsibility, you go at it with the same energy as if you were the leader of that team. You're going to be on some teams you're not going to like, by the way. You're going to work for some people you don't particularly like. You got to be on the team. And so I think, because it's just natural, because every boss you're going to have isn't going to be your favorite. I had some who weren't my favorite. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to hear your views about two distinctively different leaders, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Both are engineers, both are known as very innovative. Can you comment about their style and your thought about it?
I can comment. I don't have any knowledge. I don't know either one of them personally. I know about them. I know some of the people who work in the companies. They're both terrific idea people. I think Jeff has surrounded himself with a lot of great talented people, and so he's not doing it all himself. I don't know why he's buying newspapers. I don't know why he's buying Whole Foods. So some of it kind of eludes me, but I think he's got a team that's a really established company with an established. It's not about just him; it's about the whole leadership. If you look at the challenge, I think Musk has had he's got it too much on his own shoulders. I think sleeping on the manufacturing floor is not a good sign. I think you can see what pressure does to people. I mean, and we all have. I mean, there's pressure in this job. the pressure to get 10,000 Model 3s out the door every week really changed him. And it's not exactly the behaviors you'd be looking for if you were saying, what is the culture of this company I'm going to work for? So I think he needs, Steve Jobs is another good example. You know, you remember he got fired from Apple, right? So he got fired from Apple. I happened to be executive assistant to John Akers, who was chairman of IBM at the time. So Steve gets fired from Apple. He starts this company called Next. So he calls up, and so you see the chairman, he's got to go through me. So he says, oh, so what he wants to do is buy Next to take Apple out. That's what he wanted to do. We didn't think it was going to work, so we didn't buy into it. But Steve was a little bit like Musk at this point, in my mind. And what he needed was somebody like Tim Cook. Tim actually was former IBM manufacturing guy, but he'd actually run something. He could talk to humans a little better than Steve could. I know Jobs a little better. But, you know, it got to be about Steve. And so when he went back, it could be about Steve, but yet he had somebody else to do the stuff he wasn't good at. And I think that's why they've been successful at, and they, you know, sometimes you get lucky, you get a really good product. So, but they're all different. But it's who you have to surround you, because I can tell you, nobody can do those bigger jobs by themselves. And the ones that think they can, that's the ones that get in trouble, I think. Because you can't know enough. When I first got to be a CEO, I got this list of 7 things that a new CEO doesn't know, basically. It said, 1, you don't run the company. People that work for you run the company. I remember it says, it's hard to really know what's going on. And that's true, because you get isolated. I mean, so if you aren't walking the stores at Sears, you don't know what's going on. And you're always sending a message. Those are the 3 I remember, the 7. But whatever you do, however you're talking to people, seeing people, you're sending a message every day to somebody. Now, that's particularly true in Asia Pacific when you're talking to different cultures. I mean, they see you in 15-minute segments, so you're sending a message. Just the way you walk around the building, you stop and talk to people. Are you paying attention to what's going on? You know, because communication there is a lot harder. Yes, ma'am.
You have a company like Comcast, for instance, who is sort of known for horrible customer service. Is that a company maybe that's just decided this isn't where we're going to put our resources, this isn't the ethos we're going to create, and we're going to do fine without it? And like, how can they?
Well, I think you got to know what your core competencies are, and theirs just happens to be bad service. I think those companies have just grown too fast. They just aren't investing enough in that, and they can get away with it. So that doesn't last. That's why you're getting all the cut the cord things and all that kind of stuff. So it will end up biting them. But I think it was they were growing too fast. They were spending the money on geography, not on people that serve the ones they had. And so that to me is a bad deployment of the limited resource you have in terms of how you spend your money. But I don't know, so I can't really say that. But most people say they're bad service.
What do you think is the main reason that there are no female leaders in general?
I think there are a lot of female leaders. Jenny Romani at IBM, I was Jenny's mentor throughout her early career at IBM. She had worked for me 3 different times, so she's done extremely well. But, you know, every board I'm on has 2 to 3 women, 3 or 4 women. You know, so I think that's, in most companies, that's kind of, you know, it's all merit at this point. And I think if you look at where the demand is, where people are trying to really accelerate people in careers, it's in the underrepresented groups, and it's in women. Things like California doesn't make a lot of sense to me, where they mandate you got to have 2 women on every board that's located in California. That doesn't. I wouldn't be happy with that if I was a woman. Let me get there because I should be there, not because you told them I had to be there. Yeah, I forget, you know, you can see any number of, Pepsi was run by a female, there's a lot of them. So senior levels, there's a lot now. It's, you know, look, it's tough to manage, you know, it's, whether you're male or female, managing a career, managing a family, and managing a spouse or partner, those are all three hard jobs, and sometimes they conflict. And so that's a challenge I think all of us have. One of the biggest challenges I had, we moved all the time. You move 6 times in 8 years, you don't know where you're from, right? Yes, ma'am.
So, like, along with what you're saying, if a company, like at IBM, respect the individual, the company, you're saying mandating it isn't good enough, because you could get someone in the position who maybe isn't ready, or wouldn't have been in that position, they wouldn't have gone up through the ranks. But if you have a culture that values the individual, then it creates an equal playing field, and people will.
Well, one of the ways we did at IBM, we had what was called an open door policy. So anybody in IBM could write the chairman, and the chairman would respond to that letter. You know, a lot of times they didn't like the manager or what. So I get this job to be executive assistant to John Akers. So I'm there the first week. I'm there the first month. I get a call from T.J. Watson. You ever heard of T.J. Watson? Started IBM, right? So he's not working anymore, but he's off. So he calls me over to his office. I'm saying, well, am I going to go see Tom Watson for, you know? So the only question he asked me, because being the executive assistant, kind of everything that gets to John kind of goes through you to make sure it's worthy of his time and that kind of stuff. The other part of that job is just following him around. But the only thing he asked me is, tell me how you're handling the mail. I mean, well, I'm handling the mail. He says, when employees complain, he wanted to know how the open door policy was working. Did John read them? Did John sign those letters, or did he have a machine sign those letters? So John's behavior and behavior after him, that just says, we respect the opinions and thoughts of everybody. We'll investigate them. So did we spend a lot of money on that? Did we spend a lot of time on that? We did. That's the only way you have people believe it. Yes, sir.
So how do you know you've done a good job as a leader? Because you cannot please everybody on your team.
No. Your job's not to please them. Your job's to run the company, right? So, well, you know by the loyalty that people have in working for you. You know, because you're going to have some hard conversations with people that they aren't performing at the level you think they should be. And they're either going to hear that, be self-aware and do something about it, or they're going to say, you know, you're wrong, I'm right, and then therefore it's not going to last very long. But your job, it's hard to be a close friend with the people that work for you. You want to be close to them, they can't be your best friends. And that's hard sometimes because you really spend a lot of time with them. And you count on them a lot, but you kind of have to make that separation somehow. But you don't make anybody happy. You don't make everybody happy, that's for sure. Because everybody wants the same thing. When you get to in a big company, the funnel gets very narrow at the top. The discussion I had with Lou Gershon, there were two of us really kind of people that only one was going to get it. Doesn't make me a bad person or Lou's not smart for picking Sam, but it's just part of life. Yes, ma'am.
I know that you would look for different characteristics if you're looking for your head of finance as opposed to your head of sales. But as the CEO, what characteristics in common would you look for in people that you would think would have leadership abilities for your organization?
Well, by the time I got to look at them for that, they've got a track record I can kind of check on. So I'm not having to discover it all myself. You got references, you've seen them, you got to know people that do see them. You're looking for somebody that adds skills that you don't have,
You look for people, can they create leaders? Are they good going down? Are they not just good at communicating up? Are they good at communicating down? You assume that subject matter expert is good. That you kind of assume. So then it's just a matter of how they fit with you. You know, are we going to get along as a team? Because I do think that matters. It's not fun to go to work with a lot of people you don't like. I never did it, but I don't think it would be fun. But you get at that level, you've got a lot. They've got a long track record. So you're not as. That's why hiring somebody from outside to come into a business, you get it right about 40% of the time. That's what the good search firms would tell you. If you've had somebody that's grown, you got a lot more real information. Because everybody's got a good resume. You've all got good resumes, and then, you know, you haven't done anything, you have good resumes, you know. They teach you how to write good resumes without doing anything anymore. So that's good. Well, look, thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much. Good luck to you, and go Gators.